Hi everyone, and welcome to the channel, and I'm here for a list video for you guys. Now for this list, I'll be going over 8 of the most essential rock albums of all time. These are albums that I believe you should check out. If you do call yourself a rock music fan, I think you should most definitely check out these albums. And no, I don't care if you just listen to modern rock. If you do call yourself a rock music fans, these albums are like a big must, I think. So yeah, let's go ahead and get into this list. This list is in no particular order. So I think we'll start off with Alice in Chains with their album Dirt. Now, there is the debate on whether or not Alice in Chains is really rock or metal. I think they do lean more rock than they do metal, since they are in the grunge scene, of course. And I think grunge is more rock than it is metal, although that still is debatable for some people. But what a solid album this is. Of course, this is in Lane Staley's era, and probably one of the best albums of the 90s. And, you know, this album has some of Lane Staley's best vocal performances. Of course, it has some of my favorite Alice in Chains songs, such as Wood and Angry Chair. And those songs are in the second half of the album. Now, the reason I bring that up is because usually with most albums, it's usually the first half that has the better songs. But in this case, it's a bit of a tough call, because some of my favorite Alice in Chains songs are in the second half of this album. But don't get me wrong, this album has some very strong stuff in the first half. Of course, you got Rain When I Die, Them Bones, and Down in a Hole, which are also good. But yeah, definitely a classic. So Alice in Chains, Dirt. Next album up, we got Van Halen and their debut album. Obviously a classic, and this is one of the first albums that immediately come to mind when I think of rock albums that every rock music fan should check out. Now, this is not necessarily my favorite Van Halen album. I would say that my favorite is Fair Warning. Now, maybe some of you might be wondering, well, if that's your favorite, why is that not on the list, but their debut is? But I said that this is their this is their most essential album. You know, my favorite album and most essential album are two different things, of course. You know, this is just based on my opinion, of course, on what I think is the most essential, opposed to my opinion on which albums I like more or whatever. But I would say that this is probably Van Halen's most essential album. It's definitely a very strong album, for sure. This album does have some of Eddie's best guitar playing, and a lot of really great songs on the album, like Runnin' with the Devil, Ain't Talking About Love, You Really Got Me, and On Fire. Really great closing track. That song is just so energetic and fun to listen to. But yeah, so Van Halen, the debut album. So next we got Led Zeppelin, the debut album. Now, I'll be honest, I actually have 2 Led Zeppelin albums on this list. Yeah, I couldn't just pick one Led Zeppelin album that I would say is essential. I think they have 2 very, very essential albums for rock music fans. And this album, the debut, was my introduction to Led Zeppelin. This was the first Led Zeppelin CD that I've ever purchased and all that, and it still probably is my favorite of theirs. This album does have some of my favorite Led Zeppelin songs, of course, especially Dazed and Confused, which is maybe my favorite Led Zeppelin song of all time. I mean, it's got a really great solo, probably has one of the best solos the band has ever done, and there's just a lot to like about that song. Of course, the closing track, How Many More Times, is probably another one of my favorite Led Zeppelin songs. I really love everything about that song. I mean, there's other really great songs on the album too, such as Good Times, Bad Times, and Communication Breakdown. I mean, there's a lot of really great songs on the album. This album is definitely a classic. So yeah, I mean, just excellent stuff. So Led Zeppelin, the debut album. So next, the other Led Zeppelin album that I have on this list, I feel like this one is kind of a no-brainer, and it is Led Zeppelin IV. Now, I think a lot of people would say that this album is actually more essential than their debut album, but their debut album, I think, is just as recognizable as this album, you know, as far as, you know, everything that it has to offer, I think. Now, this album is, of course, regarded as their most successful album, or at least one of their most successful albums. I mean, if you are someone that is looking to get into classic rock, like you're looking to get into rock of the 70s, if you're not that familiar with it and you just don't know where to start with that era, I think that this album would be a very good gateway. I mean, the album is very easy to get into, it's very easy to listen to, and I think it's a very strong album. Yeah, the album, you could argue it's a little overplayed, especially the song Stairway to Heaven. I do like that song, but I do think it's kind of overplayed. But this album has other really great songs, of course, like Black Dog, Rock and Roll, and When the Levee Breaks. Just excellent stuff. I mean, definitely check this album out if you call yourself a rock music fan. I think this album would make a lot of people's lists when they name essential rock albums. So, Led Zeppelin IV. So, next we got some Rush. Now, the Rush album that I have on this list is Moving Pictures. I think this is a no-brainer. I think when most people would have a Rush album on an essential rock albums list, I think Moving Pictures would be the pretty much go-to album for a list like that. Now, maybe some people would have 2112 or Permanent Waves on the list. Now, those are both really good albums as well, but with Moving Pictures, I would say that this is definitely their most essential album, and it probably is my favorite Rush album, to be honest. And Rush is probably one of my favorite bands, too, to be honest. Now, this album, it's also very easy to get into. It's very easy to listen to, and this album does a good job of balancing both the commercial side of the band and the proggy side of the band. I mean, this album definitely has a lot to offer. It has some of Rush's best songwriting and some of their best songs in general. I mean, you got really great songs on here, like Tom Sawyer, which is one of Rush's most popular songs, and for good reason. Red Barchetta is also great. Of course, you got YYZ, Limelight. Now, Limelight, maybe a little overplayed, but definitely not bad, though. Still a very strong track. The Camera Eye is pretty underrated, probably one of my favorite epics from the band. Witch Hunt and Vital Signs are also good. I mean, I pretty much named all the songs on this album. I mean, this song is just an absolute masterpiece. It is just amazing. I mean, this is one of those albums that I would easily give a 10 out of 10 score. That's just how great this album is. So yeah, this album is definitely a must. It's a must listen, so this album had to make the list for sure. So, Moving Pictures by Rush. Next, we got Asia, the debut album. Definitely a very strong album for sure, and definitely a classic. It, of course, came out in the early 80s, and this is probably my favorite Asia album as well. I know that there's some people that say that this is actually the only good album that Asia ever came out with. They are kind of like a one-hit wonder type of band. Like, this was like their only really big album, I think, which is kind of absurd if you ask me, because they have a lot of other really strong albums, I think. But I do see the appeal for this album, though. It's definitely, I would say anyway, it's their best. Of course, you know, you got really great songs on here, like Heat of the Moment, very catchy and just excellent. It's fun to listen to. Time Will Only Tell. Soul Survivor. Cutting It Fine, also really good. Definitely a lot of really great songs on the album. So Asia, the debut album, definitely a very great album, definitely worth checking out for sure. Next, we got King Crimson, In the Court of the Crimson King. Of course, this band are prog legends, definitely a very strong album, and this is probably my favorite King Crimson album. It's a classic, of course, and yeah, if you're a rock music fan and haven't heard this album yet, do yourself a favor and check it out. It's proggy, it's just really intriguing to listen to. This album does have some of King Crimson's best songs, of course, like the opening track, 21st Century Schizoid Man, Epitaph, which is maybe my favorite King Crimson song of all time. You also got I Talk to the Wind, which I think is good too, but yeah, definitely a very strong album. So, In the Court of the Crimson King by King Crimson. So lastly for this list, we got Yes, the Yes album. This album is not my favorite Yes album, but like I said with Van Halen, even though This is not my favorite album from the band. I would say it's still probably their most essential. I would say that my favorite is actually Close to the Edge, but I would say that the Yes album is a little more essential, I think. Mainly because, you know, this album pretty much, this is like the album where they really started to be more, they really started to get their sound, I guess. This is arguably the first album where Yes became Yes, or whatever you want to say about it. But yeah, I mean, I can go on and on about why I think this album is essential, but of course this does have some of their best songs, like Yours Is No Disgrace. I mean, this song is, it's got to be a top 10 favorite Yes song for me. It's just excellent. I mean, the guitar work and the intriguing moments in the song, it's just fantastic. You also got I've Seen All the Good People and Perpetual Change. A lot of really great songs on this album, so definitely worth a listen. So the Yes album by Yes. So there you have it. That is my list of essential rock albums. Let me know what you guys think. Are there any albums do you think I missed? Now, this is not necessarily a top 8 list or whatever, because I know some people might say that I've missed AC/DC, Pink Floyd, or Kiss, and, you know, a bunch of other bands maybe, but this is not necessarily a top 8. These are just 8 of the most essential rock albums of all time. But yeah, I figured this video was worth making, of course, you know, just to give people some pointers on where to start, you know, when getting into some of these bands. And I think that these are good gateway albums when getting into these bands as well. So there you have it. So with that being said, let me know what you guys think of this list. Have you heard these albums? Let me know. So on that note, thanks for watching. Have a nice day and take care.